You could have one person who's doing one thing with his hands, but then looking in a different direction. What is the thing that is holding those two pieces together? What's the commonality? It's that he's terrified of losing control. He's clinging to the mast because he wants to be in control, and he's yelling at the men because in his need for control, he's lost control of himself. So relationships create the dialogue.
Okay, so we're super excited to have Daniel here, and he's going to talk to us about creating a strong narrative in your artwork. So I'll let Folta take this, and again, if you guys have questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end.
All right, thank you, Piper. Yeah, great to see you guys. So yeah, this is actually super exciting for me. Piper asked me to do this, and at first I was kind of like, well, I do this a lot, but I haven't really taught on this before. But I said yes, and then as I was working on it, I realized, whoa, I actually have a lot to say. So for the agenda, we'll go over really quick why I make narrative art. Then we're going to talk about creating a strong narrative painting, some of the theory that goes behind that, at least as I've discovered it, still learning a lot myself, and I'm just sharing what I've learned with you all. And then we'll also get into some more practical things about the tools that I've used for creating narrative compositions and what my process is for reference creation and building out these narrative pieces. And then hopefully we'll have time for a live Q&A. Okay, so I had to start with a story. As a lot of you know, my origin story as an artist was that I wasn't interested in art. I was interested in writing and things, and I would just do a little bit of drawing for my stories. It was then that I met Kevin. My mom dragged me into his classes, but I wasn't really thinking about becoming an artist or anything. I was really just focused on telling stories. So it's just to understand that story has been a long time passion of mine. I didn't want to create art that just looked nice. I always gravitated towards making art that meant something. Story is really one of the most powerful and ancient traditions of humanity in how we convey meaning and truth. And so there once was a boy named Daniel who wanted to write stories that meant something. So let's talk about that. How do we tell stories in a painting? And the first thing that I want to start off with is just kind of a blanket statement, is that art is all about relationships. This is fundamental to narrative art. As you all know, we have value, edge, and color. Those are all relationships that you manage to make your paintings. But you also have relationships like good versus evil, water and stone. Like, think about how beautiful it is to see waves crashing up against a rocky shore, and how stone is like unchanging, it's unmoving, but over time water can soften it and change its shape, right? So there's like these relationships that are interesting to us. We have one desire versus another, things like that. A comparison between two or more things that conjures up harmony or tension, and that drives people towards dialogue, right? You're creating a story. So as an example, what would this young girl say to the knight in this painting? Or how is the broken knight changed by seeing the girl standing before them, right? And so you're starting to create a dialogue. Questions are being asked. In this painting also, we've got these people on this boat, and they're all scared of the storm. So there's a relationship between the people and the storm. But then there's also Jesus with the blue halo, who has a different relationship to the storm. He's calm, he's at peace, right? And then from those two relationships, you also have the disciples' reaction to Jesus based on that. And so then you have a narrative. And that is kind of the bigger, like, overarching thing. You can go deeper to think about how each one of these disciples has their own independent relationship to the storm, how they're reacting to it, how they're responding to it. But on a grand level, we have this overall picture that's creating a singular narrative. And that's really where I want to start, is that you have to have these big relationships, these big questions that are being asked. And it's actually just like how we paint values in Evolve, right? We take all of the values, the infinite range of values that exist, and we boil them down into just 4 values. And you learn how to simplify them into just 4 values, so that you're understanding the overall relationships, the big relationships, in order to create the impression of something. And the same thing goes in creating a narrative piece of art. Good relationships, they create questions, and questions ignite imagination. Once you engage their imagination, you've got an audience of people listening to your story, or they're creating their own story with your material. Either one is good, because either one is creating a story. Okay, so let's kind of break this down more examples in people. You could think about a person in a narrative painting. Where would they be looking how does where their eyes are convey where their focus is? Or what are they doing with their hands? Are they pointing? Are they clenching? Is their hand just dangling limply? How do their actions convey their intentions and their emotions? Where's their torso facing? Where are their feet pointing? And the beautiful thing about this is that you can actually create relationships like within these things. You could have one person who's doing one thing with his hands, but then looking in a different direction, right? So now you have relationships that are inside of relationships. And like you think about like the best TV shows that you've seen with like these awesome character-driven stories. They're multi-dimensional. There's parts about them that you like, other parts that you don't. They have contradictions, right? And this is why contrapposto kind of works in a way, right? You've got this, when shoulders are angled up one way, the hips are angled in a different direction. And I'm going to kind of use this contrapposto term loosely here, basically to describe just contradictions that converge together, right? And that's, again, it's what makes us human. Like as humans, we are living contradictions. And when we ask questions through our paintings that have these kind of relationships, these tension or these harmony, we immediately gravitate towards them because we all relate to them. We all have them. So another example, this man on the gripping onto the mast, right? He's gripping onto the mast. You can see his relationship to the storm is that he wants to be safe. He wants to have security. But then his face is not looking up at the clouds. He's not looking at the water. He's looking at the other men. And you can imagine he's yelling at them, saying like, wake them up, right? So there's a contrast, a pointing of two different directions that's happening right here. And so then what is the thing that is holding those two pieces together? What's the commonality between those two slightly opposed angles? And for me, it's that he's terrified of losing control. He's clinging to the mast because he wants to be in control, and he's yelling at the men because in his need for control, he's lost control of himself. Once you kind of get into that and you have these relationships that convey the meaning, and if they're relationships that are applicable, then the dialogue goes from the painting back to you in your own life. You think, man, I've had times in my life when I wanted control and I lost my control. And so again, relationships are powerful, and that's how the meaning and story gets conveyed. Why do relationships work? Because we as humans are captivated by mystery and we are searchers of truth. And that's a big passion of why I love making narrative art. Good relationships, they captivate us, they take us on a journey. Now, if we zoom out from that character who's gripping onto the mast, we kind of just did like a little close-in relationship analysis, right? What's his situation? What's his relationship with the storm? What's going on? But we also need to think about the overarching context. Does he still contribute to the overarching problem of all these disciples freaking out over the storm? So what would this look like if he was actually missing? And actually, if you look at it, the disciples actually don't look as scared. The situation isn't as urgent with him not being there. So he's heightening the fear of those around him. He's actually heightening our own fear of like, whoa, this is a serious situation. They're fighting for their lives here. Everything is at stake. And by him yelling, it just creates a sense of urgency in the painting. And so again, to keep that in mind, big relationships, the overarching relationships first, and then work your way down. Just like how with values, we start with these basic things and then get more narrow into the details and things like that. So that's one aspect of creating relationships for a narrative. But then there's also creating a visual journey. In our paintings, we capture a single moment, but we can do a lot to create a flow of understanding what's happening and then, what happens next and things like that. So.